must really be sick, he thought to himself. That was the only thing he had, was the brains and the sense to actually put a thought together. I need help, but he couldn't open his mouth. I gotta get to a hospital. I must really be sick. He went and he put his arms and he tried and he finally rolled off the bed onto the floor. Now that he was on the floor, he needed to move. So he put his elbows and he tried to drag himself across. And he took everything he could to muster up, "Help! Call 911! Somebody!" And while he was calling, he saw the rest of his skin floating in the air away from his body across the room to where that skeleton was. And all of a sudden he heard, "No one's gonna help you now." By now he couldn't speak. He thought, "Who is that?" The skeleton got off of the hook. He had taken the form of the young man. He walked over at this pile of bones lying on the ground and said, "You don't deserve to be here. You didn't want to go to med school anyway." And with every breath the young man could muster up, all he could do was say in his mind, "Who are you?" The figure picked up the pile of bones that was now the young man and carried it across the room and hung it on the hook where it once stood. And he looked at him and said, "My name is Hippocrates. You cannot take that oath because you don't want to be a doctor. As for me, what shall I do now after 2,000 years?" He hurried as fast as he could in his stocking feet, and he ran up the stairs and got to the bed. She was following pretty close after him. And when he got into the bed, he pretended to be asleep. She came and she checked and made sure he was asleep. And when she thought he was, she crawled like a vicious animal up the attic stairs and out the window. As she flew across the swamp, probably to go meet her true love, Boo Daddy. The poor man saw her as she spread her arms out like a huge bird, cackling. He knew what he had to do. He went down the stairs and out of the house, over to the shed, and he took a can of blue paint. And he came back in, and he went upstairs, and he painted the frame of the door frame and window frame blue. He went around the house and made sure that all of the windows and door frames were blue. And then he went into the dining room where she had spun that big blob of bloody skin, and he picked it up like a big sack, and he shook it out like it was a pair of long johns. And then he took it into the kitchen and he opened up the cabinets and he took out all the salt and he poured it inside. And then he took the biggest container he had of cayenne pepper and shook it inside. And then he took the whole bloody mess and he shook until the whole thing was completely covered with that salt and pepper. And then he took that skin and he went on the back porch and he hung it on a nail. And then he went in the house and locked the door. And he went to the kitchen table and he put his head down on his arms. And he cried for the loss of his wife. The night went on. And the sun was soon ready to come up, and he could hear her returning. And when she got to the door on the attic and noticed that it was closed, she started to scream. As she went around the house from door to door, cackling and screaming until she landed on the ground when she saw her sack of skin hanging on the nail. She started to sniff. And she looked around for her husband. And she grunted. She was ready to kill him, but he was nowhere to be found. She got closer to her skin, and she took it off of that nail, and she set it on the ground, and she stepped into it. She didn't smell the salt or the pepper. And she started to pull it up her knees, up her hips, through her chest, all the way over her head. She started to look human again when she started to feel the salt and the cayenne pepper, and it started to burn from the inside out, and she started to scream. She started to spin and spin around, hoping that the spinning would put out the fire inside of her body. The faster she spun out over the swamp, and then all of a sudden she blew up into a million tiny, bloody pieces of raw meat, and it fell like rain. The alligators ate